The Roman Empire stood like a god among nations, unmatched in its power. Its marble statues gleamed under the Mediterranean sun, its roads stretched like veins across continents, and its legions marched with terrifying precision. To the outside world, Rome was eternal. To its own people, it was the heart of civilization. Festivals lit the streets, gladiators thrilled the masses in the Colosseum, and poets sang of Rome's glory as though it were touched by the divine. Yet beneath this grand display lay a stage set for tragedy. In the Senate, draped in white togas edged with purple, men of influence bowed their heads respectfully to one another, but their polite words concealed venom. Every decree, every law, every alliance carried the weight of hidden ambition. Some senators courted the emperor's favor in public, only to conspire against him in whispered midnight gatherings. Others masked their envy with feigned loyalty, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike. Within the imperial palace, where gold mosaics shimmered and fountains sang, danger flowed more quietly than any stream. The emperor's family dined together, smiling across lavish tables, but behind each smile flickered suspicion. A trusted cousin might harbor dreams of the throne. A devoted wife might be secretly bound to the emperor's enemy. Even the servants carried secrets, for a misplaced word in the palace corridors could determine who lived and who fell by morning. And the people, ordinary Romans who crowded the markets and filled the amphitheaters, believed they were living in the greatest age of mankind. They cheered their emperors, worshipped their gods, and trusted in the empire's unshakable strength. None of them knew that even as they celebrated Rome's eternal glory, a storm of betrayal and ambition was building in the shadows. The empire's grandeur was a mask, beautiful, dazzling, unforgettable, but fragile. And when it cracked, it would reveal not divinity, but the raw hunger for power that beat in the heart of every Roman elite. The question was not if the mask would break, but when. The Senate of Rome, a hall of polished marble and towering columns, stood as the symbol of republican virtue. Yet inside its echoing chamber, honor was little more than a costume. Beneath the carved statues of Rome's ancestors, men in white togas gathered not to serve the people, but to serve their own ambitions. Every word spoken aloud was carefully rehearsed, every speech designed to dazzle the masses, yet behind the grand orations were hushed conspiracies whispered in darkened corridors. A casual handshake in the forum might mask an oath of treachery. A friendly embrace might conceal the promise of a dagger. Some senators aligned themselves with the emperor, bowing low, their voices dripping with devotion. But their loyalty was a lie. By night, these same men met in secret villas, drawing maps of power, calculating how many legions could be swayed, and deciding which rival must be silenced. Others preferred subtle sabotage. A delayed shipment of grain, a bribe to a general, or a rumor planted in the streets that could topple reputations like crumbling statues. The Senate itself had become a theater, its floor polished with bloodless words, but its air heavy with the promise of blood to come. Younger senators, eager for influence, played both sides, learning the art of deception from their elders. Older ones, drunk on power, sharpened their schemes with the patience of spiders. And then there were the shadow players, the ones who said little but listened to everything. A single whispered conversation overheard by the wrong ears could shift the balance of Rome's destiny. Senators trusted no one, for betrayal often came from a friend seated beside them. From the galleries above, the people of Rome saw order, debate,
and majesty. But if they had leaned closer, if they had truly listened, they would have heard the truth. The Senate was less a council of statesmen and more a nest of vipers, each waiting to strike. In these whispered plots, the empire's fate was decided not on the battlefield, but in silence, in secrecy, and in lies.
The emperor stood as the living embodiment of Rome's might, draped in purple robes and crowned with laurel. To the people, he was almost divine, a man chosen by fate to guide the empire. His image appeared on coins, his statues lined the streets, and his victories were paraded as proof of Rome's eternal strength. But inside the gilded walls of the imperial palace, the emperor was not a god. He was a man walking through shadows. The corridors gleamed with mosaics of triumph, yet in those same corridors lurked whispers of treason. His most trusted advisors smiled in the daylight, but bartered secrets in the darkness. His generals returned from campaigns with laurels, but also with ambitions that made them dangerous. His own family, seated beside him at the banquet table, were perhaps his greatest threat, because no dagger strikes closer than the one held by kin. The empress whispered in his ear, offering counsel wrapped in honeyed words. Was it love, or was she guiding him toward her own hidden design? His son dined quietly, respectful and obedient, yet his eyes lingered too long on the imperial crown, as though he measured how heavy it would feel upon his own head. Even loyal servants could not be trusted. One misplaced goblet of wine, one carefully mixed poison, and an emperor could fall before dessert was finished. Every night, the emperor lay in his chamber, surrounded by guards who swore absolute loyalty. And yet, he wondered which of them had already been bribed. Which hand might unclasp its sword in the silence before dawn? He ruled the mightiest empire the world had ever seen, but he could not rule the hearts of those closest to him. The shadow followed him everywhere, in the council chamber, where senators flattered him to his face and plotted against him in secret, in the palace halls, where servants bowed low but listened too carefully, even in the temple, where priests prayed for his health, while wondering how long his reign would last. For an emperor of Rome, glory was inseparable from danger. To sit upon the throne was to live with one truth. Every ally could become a rival, and every shadow might be the one that held the knife.
The roar of the crowd shook the Colosseum like thunder. 50,000 voices rose as one, demanding blood, demanding spectacle. To the citizens of Rome, the games were entertainment, proof that their empire was unmatched in wealth and glory. But to those who knew how to look closer, the arena was more than a stage of violence. It was a battlefield of secrets. Gladiators clashed beneath the blazing sun, their armor gleaming, their swords ringing out with every strike. Yet not all the battles were what they seemed. Some were fixed long before the combatants stepped onto the sand. A general might pay to see his enemy's favorite fighter slain in the arena. A senator might bribe a gladiator to let his rival's champion win, turning public opinion in the rival's favor, or against it. And sometimes the games carried messages far more dangerous than a mere wager. A gladiator's shield might bear a pattern understood only by a secret faction. The way a fighter spared his opponent could be a signal, a pledge of loyalty to a hidden cause. Even the order of the matches could be coded, timed to coincide with whispers moving through the city outside. Beneath the Colosseum, in the dank tunnels where the fighters waited, darker dealings took place. There, men of influence came not to watch, but to conspire. Coins passed hands, scrolls exchanged ownership, oaths were sworn in whispers as loud as swords above. The gladiators themselves, seen as slaves and entertainers, were sometimes trusted couriers of information because no one looked too closely at the man condemned to fight for his life. For the crowd, a slain lion or a victorious champion was just sport, but for those in the know, the arena was a living code, a stage where power shifted behind the veil of blood. And so, when the people cheered for their favorite gladiator, they did not know. His survival or his death could topple a senator, sway a general, or ignite a rebellion. The sand of the Colosseum was soaked not only in blood, but in secrets.
The banquet hall of Rome glittered like Olympus itself. Golden lamps burned fragrant oils, casting warm light over marble pillars and frescoed ceilings. The tables sagged beneath the weight of roasted boar, honey-drenched fruits, and amphorae of the finest Falernian wine. Musicians played gentle notes on lyres, while slaves poured cup after cup for senators, generals, and the emperor himself. To the outside eye, it was a night of celebration. But in Rome, a banquet was never just a feast. It was a battlefield. Poison was the weapon of choice for those too cautious for daggers. Invisible, silent, and devastating, it could kill a man in minutes or haunt him for weeks with a wasting sickness. A chalice raised in friendship could carry betrayal more lethal than any sword. The emperor lifted his goblet, smiling broadly as courtiers cheered his health. But in the shadow of that cheer lurked fear. Every sip he took was a gamble. Had the wine been poured from a trusted emperor, or had it been switched by trembling hands behind the curtain? His food taster drank first, as always. Yet even tasters could be bribed, or fooled by poisons so subtle they killed only after hours had passed. Around him, eyes watched carefully. A senator lifted his own cup just a moment too late, as though waiting to see if the emperor survived the first sip. A general dabbed at his lips nervously, his gaze flicking to the woman across the table who refused to drink from her chalice at all. The empress raised her goblet elegantly, but the smile she offered her husband was cold, almost calculating. Even the servants, moving silently among the guests, carried their own secrets. Some had been bought with silver, others with promises of freedom. A single slip of powder into the wrong cup could change the course of the empire overnight. And so, beneath the music and laughter, the room pulsed with tension. The guests toasted to Rome's eternal glory, but in truth, each wondered who among them would still be alive when the morning came. For in the empire of masks and shadows, a poisoned cup was more powerful than any legion.
The Ides of March, a day etched forever in the memory of Rome. Julius Caesar, conqueror of Gaul, master of legions, and would-be king, entered the theater of Pompeii with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Senators bowed, crowds parted, and Rome itself seemed to tremble at his steps. History tells us that he was betrayed by Brutus, Cassius, and their fellow conspirators, men who struck him down in defense of the Republic. But what history does not reveal is the deeper web of treachery that lay behind those daggers. Brutus, torn between loyalty and ideology, was no lone hero. He was a pawn in a game far older and far more dangerous. The whispers that drove him were planted carefully by hands unseen, shadowy figures who stood to gain far more than freedom from tyranny. Some of them were senators who had already sold their loyalty to foreign gold. Others were generals who dreamed of wearing the laurel crown themselves. And there were those even darker, secret cults and hidden brotherhoods that saw in Caesar not a tyrant, but a threat to their silent dominion. When Caesar fell to the ground, bleeding beneath the statues, his last words were not only of betrayal, but of recognition. He had seen the faces behind the plot, and he understood that his murder was not the end of ambition,
but the beginning of a new storm. The assassination unleashed chaos, but it also achieved what its true architects desired. The empire fractured, loyalties divided, and the door opened for power to flow into unexpected hands. Some conspirators who had sworn they acted for the Republic lived only long enough to realize they had been pawns, eliminated swiftly once their usefulness ended. The tragedy of Caesar was not simply that he was betrayed by friends. It was that his murder was merely the surface of a far deeper game, a conspiracy so vast that it would echo through generations, poisoning the veins of Rome long after his blood dried on the marble floor. The Republic did not die with Caesar. It had already been murdered silently in the days before his fall. His death was only the curtain rising on the next act of Rome's bloody drama. Beneath the glittering temples and triumphal arches of Rome, there lay another world, one of shadows, torches, and whispered prayers. Deep in the catacombs, where the air was damp and the walls echoed with ancient chants, secret cults gathered, invisible to the eyes of the empire. These were no ordinary worshippers. Some followed forbidden gods from the east, mysteries of Isis, Mithras, or Cybele, gods whose rites Rome tolerated in public, but feared in private. Others bowed to darker powers, blending old Roman traditions with secret oaths that promised wealth, vengeance, or power in exchange for loyalty. To the senators above, these cults were nuisances at best, threats at worst. But in truth, they were the unseen hand that could sway Rome's destiny. A general might receive visions in a midnight ritual that urged him toward rebellion. A senator, desperate for influence, might slip into a catacomb shrine to seal a bargain with blood. Even members of the emperor's household were whispered to have sought forbidden blessings, their ambitions wrapped in prayers the state forbade. The rituals were as unsettling as they were mesmerizing. Torches flickered against walls painted with symbols that only initiates could read. Incense thickened the air, laced with herbs meant to cloud the mind and open the spirit. Masked figures circled altars, chanting names never spoken in daylight. Sometimes a sacrifice was made, not always of animals. Disappearances in Rome often found their answer deep underground. More dangerous still, the cults communicated in secret codes. A carved symbol on a doorway, a colored ribbon tied discreetly in a marketplace, even a gladiator's gesture in the arena, as we saw before, could signal allegiance. Entire networks stretched beneath Rome, invisible yet everywhere, ready to ignite rebellion or guide assassins' hands when the moment came. The emperor's spies tried to root them out, but the cults were always a step ahead. For every secret gathering exposed, 3 more remained hidden. And though they clashed with each other as often as they conspired together, one belief united them all. Rome would one day fall, and they would help decide what rose in its place. The empire above shone in marble and gold, but its foundation was riddled with shadows, and the cults, patient and silent, waited for their chance to pull the mighty city down into the darkness they called their home. Rome's legions thundered across the world, carving new provinces into the empire's map. Their victories were celebrated with parades, their spoils poured into the coffers of senators and emperors alike. At the head of these armies rode Rome's greatest generals, men adored by soldiers, admired by citizens, and quietly feared by the emperor. For every laurel crown placed upon a general's head, a seed of ambition was planted. The people of Rome loved their emperors, but they loved their generals more. It was the generals who fed them victories, who paraded prisoners through the streets, who built monuments from conquered wealth. To the crowds, a victorious commander was a hero. To the Senate, he was a rival. And to the emperor, he was a threat. Behind the cheers of triumphal processions, the real game began. Generals returned to the city not only with spoils, but with loyal soldiers who would follow them anywhere, even against Rome itself. Whispers spread that some commanders had begun to swear their legions to their own names, not to the Senate or emperor. One oath of loyalty in the field could one day become a march on the city. Feasts were thrown in their honor, but in every toast there was suspicion. Senators offered handshakes with smiles, while privately scheming to strip generals of their power before they grew too bold. The emperor, outwardly gracious, often welcomed them with titles, land, and wealth, yet secretly plotted to divide their loyalties, marry them into suspicious alliances, or send them back to war where fate might conveniently silence them. But the generals were no fools. Some began forging secret pacts with senators hungry for influence. Others struck deals with cults whispering from the catacombs, seeking divine legitimacy for their ambitions. A few dared to dream of what Caesar once dreamed, to be not merely a servant of Rome, but its master. The clash was inevitable, for in Rome, no man could hold too much love from the people, too much loyalty from the legions, and too much glory from conquest without drawing the dagger's edge of envy. Every general knew today's triumph could be tomorrow's accusation of treason, but ambition is a fire, and no soldier who has tasted the world will rest content in another man's shadow. The empire celebrated its champions, but in truth, Rome was teaching its protectors how to become its greatest enemies. All roads lead to Rome. To its citizens, this was a boast of power. The empire's arteries stretched from the misty forests of Britannia to the sands of Egypt, binding the known world to the eternal city. Merchants carried spices, soldiers marched in columns, and travelers crossed provinces with astonishing speed. The roads were Rome's pride, the very veins of its empire. But veins carry poison as easily as blood. Along these same stone paths, conspiracies traveled faster than legions. Couriers on swift horses carried not just decrees from emperors, but secret letters sealed with wax that bore no official mark. A senator's bribe could race across provinces overnight. A general's betrayal could be whispered from camp to camp long before Rome knew rebellion was stirring. At dusk, when shadows lengthened, the roads became dangerous theaters of espionage. Messengers vanished, their bodies found in ditches with their scrolls missing, or never found at all. Bandits, often thought to be common thieves, were sometimes hired blades, intercepting messages meant for imperial eyes. A single scroll intercepted on the Appian Way could mean the difference between a loyal army and a marching rebellion. Roadside inns, buzzing with travelers, doubled as meeting places for spies. A simple exchange of coins, a coded phrase whispered over a cup of watered wine, and entire plots shifted direction. Even the markings carved into milestones could carry hidden meanings. Symbols scratched quickly, unnoticed by most, but deadly instructions to those who understood. Worse still, the roads carried more than words. Assassins traveled them disguised as merchants. Cult emissaries moved in silence, spreading their influence from city to city. And traitors, cloaked in respectability, rode confidently through the provinces, delivering promises of power to those bold enough to betray Rome. For all their brilliance, Rome's roads did not only unite the empire, they also gave its enemies a highway straight to its heart. By day, the roads shone as symbols of order and civilization. By night, they became corridors of betrayal, where secrets moved faster than truth, and one rider with a hidden message could alter the destiny of the empire itself.
At its height, Rome believed itself immortal. Its emperors ruled with iron and gold, its armies marched unchallenged, and its people filled the streets with festivals, convinced their city would stand forever. To the outside eye, the empire was unshakable. But within, The foundations were crumbling. The Senate, once the guiding hand of Rome, had become a nest of rival factions, its members more concerned with scheming against each other than safeguarding the state. Their whispered bargains, their bribes, their betrayals weakened the very body that was meant to hold Rome together. The palace fared no better. Emperors ruled in fear of their own families, poisoned by distrust. Brothers turned on brothers, wives whispered treachery into the ears of their husbands, and sons grew restless, waiting for crowns that would never willingly be passed down. Rome's rulers no longer looked outward to defend their empire. They looked inward, terrified of shadows at their own tables. The generals, once protectors, became contenders. Each victory abroad planted ambition at home. Marches meant for conquest turned into marches toward the capital. Soldiers, once sworn to Rome, now swore to men who dreamed of thrones, men who would see the city bleed if it meant their rise. And in the shadows, the cults continued their quiet work. From the catacombs to the countryside, their influence spread like cracks in marble. Some whispered that they had foreseen Rome's fall, that they had guided the betrayals, that every dagger and poisoned cup was part of a greater design. Even the roads, once symbols of order, now carried chaos. Messages of rebellion traveled faster than decrees of law. Spies, assassins, and deserters used the empire's own veins to spread its infection. So it was that Rome began to collapse, not from barbarian invasions, but from rot within. The barbarian hordes who came later merely swept away the ruins of an empire already poisoned. The seeds had been planted long before. In every whispered conspiracy, every poisoned cup, every oath broken in secret. Rome's glory was its mask, but behind it, betrayal had been blooming like ivy in the cracks of marble. And when the mask finally shattered, the eternal city was revealed not as a god among men, but as a mortal empire, doomed by the very secrets it tried to hide.